Hi.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn on my mic.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. I'm doing well. I'm probably a little too early, but I figured, there's always funky technology things, so I thought I would just get in here and get settled.
Well, I thought I would do the same. You are recording it, correct?
It says that it's recording, so it looks like we are.
Because I have a few students that had a conflict tonight.
Oh, okay, perfect. So they
I
can
wanted to
view us.
I wanted to let them be able to watch it later.
Yeah. Which part of Souls are you in?
I'm in the Department of Leadership Studies, so I'm teaching the capstone course,
Okay.
which we actually switched and we're not doing the presentation this semester because of everything that occurred. It was
Of
just
course, of
difficult,
course.
to get it's scheduled, but they did do a video presentation of themselves. So it's hopefully, I think this will be really helpful to them.
Good, wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to meeting everyone.
Yes.
I know Heather Herrera is going to join us here in a little bit, and then I'm not actually sure how many, because I think this was optional, right, for doc students. So, do we know how many people are planning to be here?
I'm not for sure. I've had a few students contact me that they had a conflict tonight, so I'm not for sure how many will be in attendance.
Okay.
I have 19 in my course, so.
In your course, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then I'm doing the same session tomorrow for I think the learning and teaching students, but it's actually part of their class. So I'll have a captive audience.
Great, great. Well, I'll be teaching it next semester too,
Oh,
so
wonderful.
not for us to continue to.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any, feedback or, things that we might consider adding or whatever, we can certainly talk about that too.
I think.
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Haley.
Hi, I have a quick question actually. I'm part of that learning and teaching group. I was curious though, because I was already signed up for this, if this will be the same as the one tomorrow or if it'll be
Yep.
different.
Nope, it'll be exactly the
Oh,
same, but
cool.
you'll
Okay.
even get to see me again. So if
Okay.
you want,
Well, then I may just see you tomorrow.
well, that's fine. Especially
Are you sure?
if you have to be on that call. Yeah, of course, because it
Okay.
literally is going to be exactly the same
It's the
presentation.
same
So
thing.
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah. So we'll see you tomorrow. You get some
Okay.
time back.
Yeah, really. Okay. Thank you.
Bye, Haley. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
Yeah, same thing because Haley and I are in the same capstone
Are
class
you?
for learning and teaching, and
Okay.
so we were told to come today.
Oh, you were. Uh-oh.
Well, not
Okay.
like told, but like like our professor was like, "Oh, there's one on Monday," because I didn't
Oh,
know there was one
okay.
tomorrow too.
Yeah, they are. My understanding is that they're the same. Maybe, do you think that was offered in case you weren't able to make it to the Tuesday class?
Possibly, it just a classmate forwarded me this link. It was like, "Oh, it's today at 5:30." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe we could wait and ask Heather when Heather gets on the call, Heather Herrera gets on the call, because I certainly wouldn't want you to sit through the same presentation twice.
Yeah.
As engaging as I try to be, I can appreciate that may not be a good use of your time. Are you all meeting as a class then still tomorrow for teaching and learning?
Uh, no, we were kind of just like on our own agency, just like go, just out into the wind. Kind of learning and teaching. It's like every professor is a little different right now with the capstone.
Okay,
Everyone's on different levels.
right. Oh, this is wonderful. Hi, Heather.
Hey Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
Well, how you doing? Hi.
Good. It sounds like we had a student who joined a couple minutes ago from learning and teaching who was wondering if this was the same presentation as tomorrow, which I have planned them to be the same. And so she dropped off and is going to come to tomorrow's session. But we had another student who also was kind of curious about the same thing because the sessions are going to be the same. So
Sure, yeah, we
um, so Chris, I don't know if you want to stay on tonight and not go tomorrow, or if you what you want to do.
If it's the same, I'll just stay now.
You'll stay now. Okay.
Hi, can I ask a question really quickly? I'm also from Learning and Teaching. What time is the meeting tomorrow? And it's the same.
4:40.
Sorry?
It's at 4:40 tomorrow.
And then we need to sign up the same way we signed up for this one?
Who's your professor?
Dr. B. Buczynski.
Okay, I don't know if she sent out a link. I know that I sent a link to Dr. Michelle and Dr. Molina, and I did send one to Dr. B. It's a different link.
Okay. I think she might have mentioned that she put that on our Blackboard, so I'll check that there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I just
No,
heard.
these are all good questions.
Thank you.
Heather, do you know how many people signed up? Did we have advanced registrations?
We have two things going on. One is you have Dr. Boozer's class. She's here with her students, and she gave them a link directly. And then we do have it on our website, and it's open to the community. So when we checked earlier, we had about 23 people who had signed up, individuals, but then there are the other folks from classes who have access.
Okay, perfect.
I think I'm going to follow my fellow learning and teaching people and come back for tomorrow, because I think we're going to all have similar questions and whatnot. So it might be.
Sure. Well, Chris, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely.
No, everyone, bye.
And I will follow suit because I'm also in learning and teaching. So I will see you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks, Martha.
Right. Us lemurs stick together.
Lucetta, are you going to stay or are you going to go tomorrow?
On mute.
She's going to stay.
Okay, Heather, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I'm ready. I think we should get started.
We get started. Okay, hi everyone. How are you doing? We're in such interesting times now. I can't tell. I've been on Zoom a total of 5 hours today, so this will be my 6th and 7th hour on Zoom. And I already work remotely and work at a distance, but with everything being what it is, I feel like even my Zoom meetings as a remote business person have increased quite a bit. I'm really excited to spend time with you today. I do have slides put together that I will share with you. But I was hoping we could do just a quick round of introductions, since I can see some of your faces, not everyone's faces, but I can see most of you. And I'd love to just hear your name and your area of study or your discipline. And then I'm curious just to know kind of what presentation you're preparing for, if it's a defense or a capstone presentation, or maybe a job talk or a conference presentation. And then one thing, or one maybe challenge that you would like to try to overcome related to public speaking or presenting. Who would like to go first? I know your name, so I can always call on someone. How about Leslie? Leslie, we'll have you model the way.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to some of my students that are a part, and for those that aren't, hello. I am a professor in the Department of Leadership Studies, and I teach the capstone course. Our students have been preparing their final portfolios and capstone projects. We started actually a new type of capstone this semester, which is a portfolio. Typically, they do a full presentation in front of all of the professors in the department, which we're forgoing this year because of COVID-19. So instead, they did a short video that was part of their portfolio. And I know many of them do presentations very regularly for work. So that's why we continue to encourage them to come to the presentation tonight, because I know it'll be particularly helpful as they prepare for work and future work, especially interviews.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
With graduating.
Wonderful. Thank you. How about Helena or Helena?
Hi, Helena's fine. Either way. So I'm in Leslie's class. I'm a leadership studies master's student who is working on my capstone. I'm actually not finishing this spring. I'm gonna take the summer to finish up. And I think my biggest challenge is this is very different than work. You know, when you're in a professional role and you know how to prepare, kind of, it's very different to give a presentation than when you're in front of peers and faculty and just sort of overcoming that and feeling confident, I guess, in presenting academic data is probably my biggest challenge.
Okay, great, thank you.
I can go next.
Okay.
Yeah. My name is Ankit. I'm in my 4th year of PhD program at Souls. And reason for attending this session is actually I'm preparing for conference presentations. And reason for attending this session is I would like to know how I can present some statistical data and very complex table of my data analysis in some engaging way. People, if they don't have such a, everyone in the audience don't have such a deep background in analysis. So I would like to learn that thing. So how I can make those things more interesting. And I would like to know more tips and latest strategies that can help my presentation even better. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Meng-Lickmott. I am in my 2nd semester, new program at Souls, PhD for Social Justice and Education. I'm here because I also want to just pick up some tips and, you know, get better at presenting proposals, research proposals, especially, that I have to actually do one in a couple of weeks. So hope to get some good advice and some tips and tricks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
How about Tiffany?
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I'm also in Dr. Boozer's class, so the capstone course. And like she said, we were originally going to be presenting our portfolios. So at this point, there isn't a particular presentation that I'm prepping for, but just think it would be helpful in general to gain more confidence, to be able to present more articulately, and to really like draw and engage with the audience. So anything along those lines would be great.
Thank you. Nadia.
Hello, everyone. I'm in the same situation as Tiffany. Right now, we were getting ready for the capstone presentation, but I think in general for me, I tend to get very nervous before the presentations, and leading up to it, I think I just get very nervous. So any tips to just control the anxiety and the stress, I think would be very, very helpful. And yeah, any other tips that you can give us, I'm very looking forward to them.
Perfect. Thank you. How about Sarah?
Hi, another Sarah. Also echo what Nadia and Tiffany said. I'm in Dr. Boozer's class as well, and no direct presentations right now, but always looking to improve, you know, whether it's with work or future school opportunities. So yeah, just open to learn.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Mojde?
Yes.
Hi, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about kind of what you're hoping to learn, or any specific presentation you're preparing for?
And not just right now, just I want to keep myself updated.
Okay, wonderful. How about Jules?
Hi there, I'm Jules. I'm also in Dr. Boozer's capstone class. So no presentation I'm prepping for at the moment, but something I've noticed that I sometimes fall into is speaking at a faster pace in the middle of a presentation. So if there's any tools and tricks, I'd love to learn that area as well.
Okay, perfect. Justine.
Hello, I'm also in the capstone class, so no particular presentation, but just interested in learning some tips, pretty much echoing all of what everyone else has said.
So, how about Kendra?
Hello, I'm Kendra. I'm also in Dr. Boozer's class, so like the others, I don't have a presentation right now, but I want to learn some tips and hopefully something as I pursue more education that'll help me out presenting.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kendra. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi.
I love your background. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I'm going to cool off later.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say I am not in Dr. Boozer's class, so I'm the odd one out along with Ankit. But I'm a PhD in leadership. I finished the academics. Now I'm preparing in about a month's time to put on my proposal defense, and so I just like to get any tips and tricks, and wondering what there might be outside of a standard, PowerPoint. I was thinking of something else, like something from Storyline, using Storyline or other program to kind of show things. I don't want to get all flashy, but I do want to do a non-standard presentation if I can. So anything like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Let's see, Caitlin. Caitlin's muted, and it looks like we have one person on the phone, a 619 number, which isn't going to limit things because we're in San Diego. I'm not sure who that is. And then I know Melissa has a crying baby in the background, so she wrote me she wrote me a message and said, "Don't worry about me." Well, it's so lovely to see some familiar names too. I work with SOLS very closely and provide support to the SOLS Graduate Writing Center. So a number of your names are familiar to me, of course, because we've worked with you on papers. So you might, of course, be wondering, well, why is this person who's an editor and an academic coach presenting to us on presentation skills? But I actually spent 7 years of my career in higher education as the director for the Center for Communication and Public Speaking at the University of California, San Diego. And we specifically did communication and public speaking training for undergraduate and graduate students at UCSD. So I spent a lot of time doing that. That was kind of my life before starting Heartful Editor, which is the company that I now manage. And interestingly, when I was at UC San Diego running the Center for Communication and Leadership, I often thought to myself, wow, I really could do this on my own outside of a university environment, never thinking at the time that I would end up someday running a company and doing sort of skill-based trainings for graduate and doctoral students, but here we are. So it's like a full circle. The other sort of funny thing about this presentation is that we had planned for me to, of course, be on campus with all of you pre-COVID. So the initial plan was for me to be on campus. I was in San Diego when COVID first started to unfold, and then my partner and I ended up going over to Arizona for about a month, and then it got too hot, so we came back. So I'm actually I'm actually in San Diego. I'm right down the street from the University of San Diego, which is exactly where I was supposed to be this week, except now we're on Zoom because, of course, our whole world is different. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you. I'm fairly familiar with Zoom, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to still see your faces. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, and then we will get started. Thankfully, I can still hear you. So, oh, here, I can see you kind of over in the corner. Okay, can you all see that okay? I think I can still hear you. Are you able to see the slides? Yep. Okay, perfect. So just as a quick overview of our time together today, I'm going to talk briefly about our team and what we do, and share a little bit with you about our philosophy. And then I'm going to talk about presentation skills for theses, capstone projects, and dissertations. And we're also going to talk about conference presentations and job talks as well. So these are some different types of academic presentations that you might find yourself engaged in the near future or somewhere down the road. But really all of the things that we're talking about tonight are really relevant in many presentation situations. So I think you'll find these skills and tips and considerations useful across a lot of different spaces, but hopefully some of this will be interesting to you and specific to you in terms of specifically theses and capstone projects and dissertations and other academic presentations. I would love for this to be interactive, so if at any point during the presentation you have a question, feel free to chime in. I'll stop on occasion to kind of see if folks have questions, but we can certainly save them to the end as well and have some time for discussion at the end. So we already did this, we already did introductions. And I wanted to just share a little bit about what we do. So we are an academic coaching and editing company. We have 40 doctorate educated academic coaches and editors on our team who all serve as faculty or administrators in their respective disciplines. And for the most part, these are folks in K-12 and higher education, but also a lot of different disciplines as well. I'm actually a Souls alum. I got my PhD in leadership studies from Souls way back in 2010. It's hard to believe that it's been almost 10 years. It flew by. And our team supports any students or faculty members who use APA style. So that's where our expertise is strictly in APA style. We do have one editor on the team who focuses on AMA, which is the American Medical Association. And our main focus is to provide academic writing, coaching, and editing support to faculty, graduate and doctoral students, and career and academic professionals. And we work on everything from career materials and CVs and cover letters and resumes to theses and dissertations. And both from a coaching standpoint and then also in the final editing and formatting of these documents. And then we support 10 campuses nationally as academic writing coaches and editors, in addition to working with individual students and faculty. So in the state of California, we work with the University of San Diego very closely. We support Azusa Pacific University, CSU Fullerton, and San Francisco State. And then we have a number of campuses nationally that we support as well. And we do a lot of training. We do trainings on presentation skills for graduate and doctoral students related to the theses and dissertation and other academic presentations. But we also support students and faculty with trainings on all things APA. We've been very busy in the last 3 or 4 months as we have started to make the transition to the 7th edition of the APA manual. On Wednesday, I will have my 17th and 18th presentation on APA 7 this spring. So we've been very, very busy helping people to get up to speed on the new guidelines. Just a little bit about our philosophy really quick. Our philosophy as an organization is that taking care of the heart facilitates students' ability to learn. So we really consider ourselves educators before editors. We want students to learn how to develop these skills, to gain confidence in these skills so that they can be successful and thrive on their own. And we also recognize that students bring with them a lot of unique considerations that we take into account when we're working with students. So this includes where students are in terms of their own identity development, their socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, their academic background and training prior to their degree program, various social considerations, their mental health and emotional well-being, their spiritual growth and how they're defining a sense of purpose relative to the contributions they want to make in the community, and their current financial circumstances, of course, and then where this kind of training and support connects to their career development as scholars. So we're going to talk about academic presentations, again, theses and dissertation defenses, conference sessions, and job talks. So these are sort of the main things that we're going to focus on today. And then several of you, of course, have mentioned capstone projects, and we'll also talk a little bit about capstone projects. Again, all of these skills are going to be sort of relative to all of these different areas of academic presentations. So I'm sure you can imagine that one of the most important things to presenting well is to prepare as much as possible ahead of time. So when we're thinking about, something happened to my slides. I apologize for this. I tested this earlier and everything was fine, and they're all, for some reason, they're coming up out of order. So I'm just gonna pull these up. This is so interesting. I've never had that happen before. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we know and understand the context and the audience, right? So when we're thinking about an academic presentation, who are the people in the room, who's going to be attending, and then also the context. Where is the presentation going to be held? What is the room like? These are all different things that we want to talk about. We're going to talk about the importance of attending defenses and conference sessions and job talks so that you can really get a good understanding of all of the things that go into those types of presentations. I know when I was a student at the University of San Diego, I probably attended at least 15 different dissertation defenses before I actually delivered my own defense. We're going to talk about how to create visual materials to complement a talk. The importance of anticipating questions, practicing and planning ahead for the unexpected, and then just some notes on focusing on self-care sort of ahead of and the morning of a presentation, whether it's a defense or a conference presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So knowing the context and the audience is really important. I think this might be one of the most important things. I see a quick note here. Yeah, so Jeffrey just shared, it is beginning to look like at least some of our presentations will be occurring over Zoom, part of planning for the unexpected. I would say so. Usually as a part of the work that we do with students, we hold an initial consultation with all of our doctoral students that we support. And I generally ask them, so how is life as a doctoral student? And recently I've been asking them, how is life as a doctoral student in the midst of a global pandemic? Because certainly nobody would have expected that this would have been the state of our world right now. But it's really important to think about the context and the audience. And so there's a number of questions that I think are really helpful to kind of guide this preparation prior to giving a presentation. And just as a quick note, I am going to share these slides. I know that the video of this will be recorded, but I'm also going to share the slides so that if you're taking copious notes, you certainly don't need to. I'll be sending these to Heather and she can distribute out to all of you. So the first thing to really think about is who will be at the presentation. So I know that I can't see everybody, but I know that I can hear you. So who are some of the people that you might anticipate would be at a presentation? Whether it's a defense or a capstone project presentation, who are some of the people that you can expect to be presenting to?
Professors and colleagues.
Okay, right.
Committee.
Yep, your dissertation committee. And then what about at a conference presentation? Who might be in the room at a conference presentation?
People who are in the same field of study, research, and wants to know more about what's new in this field.
Right, exactly. So people who are generally in the same field of study who want to know more information about your data and your research. It's important to know if guests are allowed, especially for a defense, and is there a limit to who or how many people can attend, right? So if you're presenting a defense, these are important things to know ahead of time. Where will the presentation be held? How is the room set up? Will it be virtual, to Jeffrey's point, right? Will it be virtual, and if so, what platform will be used? If you don't know how to use a particular platform, but you know that the presentation is going to be held on Zoom or WebEx or a different type of platform, it would certainly be worthwhile to spend some time ahead of time making sure that you're very, very familiar with how to use and operate that technology. I think this is a really important question. What rituals or formalities need to be considered? Every campus is very different when it comes to presenting a defense for a thesis or dissertation, but there are a number of rituals and formalities that often need to be considered. Now, of course, in the world of Zoom defenses, right, some of this will be different. But I know when I was a student at the University of San Diego, I had 4 members on my committee. I wanted to think very strategically about how people were seated, where people were seated in the room. I think based on the time of day, I believe I brought some refreshments for my committee members because it was, I think, probably 9 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And so I had coffee available and tea available. And so just kind of thinking about the flow of the defense, right? Who starts out the defense? When do you start speaking? How much time do you have? That kind of goes to the second or the last bullet there. How long is the session and how much time do you have to speak versus respond to questions? The other important thing to consider is to attend similar talks, that are closely similar to whatever you're preparing for. So whether this is a thesis defense, a dissertation defense, a capstone presentation, job talks, anything like that, the more you can attend them and really take notes on the sort of nuances of those types of presentations, the more prepared you'll end up being. So are there conferences locally or regionally that you can attend in the same or a similar discipline? Of course, now most conferences have been canceled, but are there other types of professional development opportunities that you can participate in that will help you to get some insight into what conference presentations look like within the discipline that you're in? In some cases, professional associations do post presentations of people speaking at past conferences. So that might be an option for you to sort of see people in practice. And oftentimes faculty members will post presentations on their personal faculty website. So if you have certain faculty members or scholars who you have enjoyed watching or learning from, one option, of course, is to go find examples of them presenting at conferences or in other capacities to sort of learn from them in terms of how they present their research. In terms of job talks, what departments at your campus or nearby campuses might allow the public to attend theses or dissertation defenses or job talks? And similarly, for departments that might be hiring new faculty members, looking to see when job talks are scheduled and making it a point to actually visit those and attend those in person. Of course, again, with Zoom sort of dominating our lives, it's important to kind of think about, how might you be able to access this support in an online space. So job talks being held in a virtual way. I know for many of my academic colleagues, the job market is pretty scarce right now. So there's not a lot of opportunities posted because the hiring process has changed quite a bit with COVID. But in general, if you're able to attend job talks, either at your campus or a campus near you, this is a really good way to get familiar with what that process looks like. And it's important in these cases to take note of everything. I had a notebook that I carried with me, and I wrote down for all of my academic colleagues who were defending their dissertations, what was the setup of the room? What was their interaction like with the audience? What kinds of questions were asked by members of the committee and even audience members? And not just with the students in my cohort, but the students in the cohorts before me. So I made sure to go to defenses of all of the, as many of the students as I could that were defending the year ahead of me. And I took down as many questions as I could because those types of questions really helped me to think more deeply about not only my own dissertation, but how I prepared for my defense. It was particularly important to go to defenses for students who had members of my committee on their committee, because there tends to be some trends in the types of questions that faculty members ask. I know Fred Galloway and a couple others at USD have a sort of a standard closing question. So sometimes you can kind of pick up on these and then give yourself time to think through what might be some of the types of things that will get asked at a defense, for example. I just want to pause there real quick and just see if there are any questions from anyone in the group so far. Okay, no questions. So let's go ahead and talk about visual materials. This is obviously a really important part of the presentation. And I think one of the things that I see most often, and I'm actually, it's funny, I typically would not present with this much text on a slide, but because these I'm sending these to you afterwards as a resource, there's far more content on here than I would normally include. But one of the things that I see a lot is visual materials that sort of take the place of the speaker as opposed to complementing your talk. So it's really important that the visual materials are sort of secondary to your presentation, that they don't replace you as the speaker. And I think Jeffrey asked about other options outside of PowerPoint or Keynote. I know about Prezi. I have certainly heard of Storyline, and I don't know that there's really a strict expectation that you use any particular type of a visual tool. I think the important thing is that you really think about the information that you want to convey and choose a visual tool that will help to complement that. Have you all heard of other types of tools outside of PowerPoint or Keynote or Storyline that you have found useful? Even from Heather or anyone else on the call?
This is Jeff again. I know that Storyline released a supposedly easy to use product called Rise, R-I-S-E.
Okay.
And so I'm interested in checking that out. I heard it's really easy to put together, but just like everything else, I'm concerned about, flash over substance and trying to be careful. Thank you.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that that's a really good consideration, is to, you don't want to necessarily be too flashy. And it might be something that's worth connecting to connecting with your chair about, or your committee in general, and just saying, hey, this is, I think that this would be really effective for the information I want to present at my defense. This is what I'm thinking of using as a visual tool, and would you support that? And as long as they're on the same, as long as you all are on the same page, I think it's probably fine. We work with so many campuses now where we're really starting to see some variety in the types of, even the types of sources that students use, the types of methodologies that students use to collect data. And so it would follow that students will become more and more creative over time with how they present their data, both at conferences and, and during thesis or dissertation defenses. So I think I would certainly support that. And I think it's really awesome that you're being creative and thinking about new ways to present your research. I'm seeing a couple questions here, and I just want to see if there are, Canva. Somebody said Canva. Wonderful, thank you. So any visual materials that you use, of course, you want to have them as a guide or a framework for you and your audience, but not as the sole focus of your presentation, right? So you don't want everything that you say to be on the presentation. You want to make sure that that's really a visual cue for you, that it's complementary to the information that you're presenting. And presentations really should lead your audience through a sort of a sequential, logical sequence of information. So especially with the defense, you want to think about kind of building your argument over the course of the presentation, and really leading them through your thesis or dissertation or capstone project in a way that helps them to understand the background, leading all the way through the final implications and conclusions. Slides should be easy to read, professional and organized, and visually consistent in font, style, and format. I think one of the things that is always hard for me to see when I'm attending a presentation is, slides that have really, really small text, or a sort of a sloppy configuration of photographs or graphs or charts or figures that are hard to see the connections between different elements. So those are all things that you want to make sure are clear. And in terms of preparing ahead of time, if you have an opportunity to actually present in the space where you would be delivering a presentation, having someone there with you who can sort of view it from the back of the room and make sure that they can see what you're presenting in your visual materials is really, really helpful. If there's tags that you've used for different parts of a presentation that someone can't see, then that's definitely something to think about. And it's always better to have more slides than try to cram everything onto one slide and have the text super, super small. So if slides are the way that you prefer to complement your material visually, definitely some things to think about in terms of how they are put together. It's worthwhile to have someone, check them for grammar and spelling. And again, that consistency in presentation is really important. I would also generally, again, if you're able to provide handouts of a presentation for your audience members, regardless of the audience. Of course, if you're in an online format, the slides can be sent out either before or after the fact as a resource for people who attend. But I know, at least in my experience presenting in academic context, I always really appreciate receiving the handouts from presenters, and I always make it a practice to make sure I have them for audience members as well. It's also just a really good backup plan, right? In case something happens with the technology, you want to make sure that you have a way for people to view the information that you're presenting. So a couple things that you might see in a typical defense presentation. I wanted to just share what this would generally look like from start to finish if you were preparing a thesis or dissertation defense, for those of you who are in that place or maybe in the coming years. So a defense presentation typically would include your title, the name of your program, department, and institution, the date of the presentation. You always want to acknowledge your committee members. This is a really important part of, and when I talked earlier about sort of, rituals or things to kind of consider, you want to make sure that you're acknowledging your committee members, because they do invest a lot of time in you and they put a lot of work into coaching you and guiding you through the process. And sort of in this order, though this might differ a little bit, but you want to, of course, talk about the problem, the significance of your research, state your research questions as they're stated in your dissertation or thesis, talk briefly about your literature review and some of the background for your study, what preceded your study, what your method or methods are, your results and analysis, discussion, limitations, and then of course your recommendations for future research. And usually in a thesis or a dissertation defense, usually you don't have more than 25 minutes to present your research. I think my dissertation was maybe 300 pages. I hate to admit that out loud because I would never advise anybody to write a dissertation that long nowadays. But I remember thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to get an entire year or a year and a half worth of information into 20 or 25 minutes of a presentation? That seems almost impossible. And in some ways it is. You've spent so much time so close to that process and all of that work that it can be very, very difficult to take all of that information and distill it down to only 20 or 25 minutes. So you really have to kind of pull the most important, most salient points from your dissertation and then prepare those in a presentation. And then of course, the bulk of a defense is really the questions that come from committee members. And a lot can go into planning for that. Like I said, if you're attending dissertation and thesis defenses ahead of time, excuse me, goodness. If you're attending thesis and dissertation defenses ahead of time, you can certainly jot down questions and start to really think through what your answers might be relative to those questions ahead of your defense. So of course, on that note, in terms of anticipating questions, I would personally, if I was thinking about a defense for a thesis or a dissertation, I would start writing down pretty much any question that your instructors have asked you about your research, any feedback that you've received from your committee members. I would probably make either a Word file or some document to really capture all of those questions, concerns, anything like that in one place where you can really start to kind of flesh out your answers to those questions. And that's not just in the months preceding your defense, but really over time, right? As you start to conceptualize your research, what does it look like in terms of kind of where people have poked holes in it, where they've expressed concerns about your methodology? Those types of things will come up over time. And so the earlier you start kind of putting those questions down on paper, the more prepared you'll be when those questions get asked at your defense or at a job talk for a faculty position or at a conference presentation. So I think these are all really, really good things to think about. How have others challenged your thinking? Where are some of your tough spots? I know for me, did a quantitative dissertation on purpose because I wasn't naturally drawn to quantitative research. And so I wanted to do it just to sort of challenge myself. Again, why I did that, I have no idea, but I did it. And I remember feeling more nervous because there were things that I would have kind of considered my tough spots around quantitative analysis. So I spent a lot of time really thinking through my methodology, the tests that I ran, and making sure that I had a very clear understanding of where those tough spots were for me, and then also a clear way to respond to those questions at a defense. And then of course, later on, when I presented at conferences, all of that work, all of that preparation really helped me to be that much more prepared when I attended conferences and presented at conferences, because I had kept track of all of those questions for a really long period of time. So again, taking note of questions asked at job talks, conference presentations, and thesis and dissertation defenses can really help with the preparation. A couple of folks mentioned in our introductions, mentioned feeling some nerves and anxiety around presenting. And I know that for me, a lot of that has come from not knowing everything in advance, right? The less I know, the more nervous I tend to be. So if I don't know, for example, when I go to a conference, if I don't know the type of room that I'm presenting in, that makes me nervous. If I don't know who's going to be there, that makes me nervous. If I'm worried about the types of questions that might get asked, that makes me nervous. So these are things that can, of course, be taken care of ahead of time, because you can make sure that you know these things before you actually present. So on that note, there are a lot of ways that you can, of course, practice and plan ahead. A couple things. One is you all have colleagues that you are in class with, cohort members, maybe a writing group that you work with on a regular basis. And any talk that you have, I would recommend finding a time with those colleagues or cohort mates and practicing your talk in front of them. I don't know about you, but I know that when I was at Souls and in my master's program at San Diego State, all of the students with whom I went to school only wanted the best for me. We all wanted the best for each other, and we were really in that process together. And so we would get together on a regular basis and practice our conference talks for students who were moving on to an academic position. We would meet together and let them practice their job talks prior to going to an on-campus interview. So definitely reach out and find times to get together, present your work, and open yourself up to the feedback that might come back from your colleagues and cohort members, because it really is beneficial to practice as much as possible. I know that the cohort that I graduated with from my doctoral program, I think probably a good 2 weeks before we all defended our dissertations, we set up sort of mock defenses so we all could practice our defenses. We did that in advance of our proposal defenses and in advance of our dissertation defenses as well. So it was really helpful. And in a lot of cases, especially in a cohort, you're hearing the types of questions that some of your cohort mates are getting asked about their dissertations. So you can even ask your cohort mates to pitch questions to you so that you have a chance to practice answering them before you actually get to your defense. If you can, I would always recommend accessing the room, or of course using, if you can, to get on the same virtual platform that you'll be using for a presentation, to do that ahead of time. And that way you can learn the nuances of the technology in either space. I'm somebody that generally likes to present with one of those handheld slide advancers. And so it's always important for me when I go to a presentation to make sure that I bring one with me, because I'm not always guaranteed that one is going to be in the room. Usually they are there, but I've had situations where they haven't been. And so I just learned the hard way that because that's my preferred presentation style, that I just need to carry my own slide advancer with me when I present it at conferences. So kind of thinking about, ahead of time, making sure that you can access the room, that you can understand the nuances of the room, the lighting, the technology, how the chairs are set up. All of those things are really helpful in sort of reducing some of that anxiety ahead of time. And if you have a chance to practice a presentation in that space, I think that's a really good thing to do. I was able to access my room for my dissertation defense ahead of time, and I actually did a full defense with some of my colleagues in the space prior to the day of, which was really great. This might seem like a kind of a superficial thing, but any presentation you do, of course, is a reflection of you as an academic and as a professional. And so it's important to think about what you'll wear. And while via Zoom, you may only need to think about the top half of what you wear, you should still be thinking about your clothing options and what that communicates about you. An academic presentation, a job talk, a thesis or dissertation defense, these are all significant events in our lives that really communicate to others the work that we're passionate about and that we've been working on for a long time. So, you know, in most of these instances, you'll want to dress professionally and make sure that everything is ready to go ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is assume that you have a clean and ironed shirt and clean and ironed pants ready to go, you know, in your closet, and then wake up the morning of and realize that none of that is true, right? So certainly deciding what you will wear ahead of time, making sure everything's ready to go, and then include a backup outfit. I've been to several conference presentations and several job talks of colleagues of mine where a colleague of theirs or another candidate or somebody shows up with a coffee stain on their shirt and they didn't have a backup shirt to change into in the case something like that happens. So I actually had a sort of a funny situation a couple years ago. I brought a pair of pants with me that I just sort of assumed would fit me. Except that I had been sick for a short period of time and had lost some weight because I was sick. And so I went to put the pants on the morning of the presentation and they almost fell off me because they were too big, but I just didn't think that I had lost enough weight for my pants to actually be too big on me. So I had to quickly find a belt and make sure that I was cinched up so that they wouldn't fall off of me during the presentation. Another thing in terms of practicing and planning ahead that I would recommend is to designate someone, especially for a thesis or dissertation defense or a job talk or a conference presentation, is to designate someone to be almost like a personal assistant for you, to help with logistics, to help with technology. Oftentimes in that 30 minutes to an hour before a presentation, we're a little jittery or anxious, and it can be hard to kind of focus on all of those details and not have someone to sort of help us. And so I think it's really helpful to designate someone. I know at my dissertation defense, I had one of my colleagues just help distribute handouts for me during my defense. They recorded notes and questions as I was presenting. So anything that came up from my committee, they wrote down that information for me, so I didn't have to sort of break my focus and write down questions or notes from the committee. Any recommended edits they had or revisions they had for me, I had a trusted friend there who I knew could write all that down, and it was so helpful to have that, because then as soon as my defense was over, I was able to then take those notes immediately and start making those updates and changes to my dissertation and prepare to get the final copy back to my committee. And then of course you want to develop a plan for any glitches that you might experience with the technology. So I just want to stop real quick and check in and see if anybody on anything that we've talked about so far, if anybody has any questions. Has anyone on the call had other things that they've used as a practice strategy, or anything that they would recommend for planning ahead of a presentation that they think would be good for the group as a whole? None whatsoever. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and we'll move on to some talking about vocal and nonverbal skills. I think that one of the things that is sometimes we forget to focus on is our delivery, and not just the words that are coming out of our mouth, but how we present. So the tone of our voice, all of the ways that we sort of move and use our body, these are all things that can enhance our presentation and the focus of our research. So again, we talked earlier about thinking about what to wear ahead of time, and certainly professional appearance and your style or manner of dress is important for a professional presentation. It's also important to think about your organization and presentation of your materials. I've seen some situations where someone will come in and they might have handouts and the handouts are just all sort of disorganized, and they might be in sort of a tattered folder. And it doesn't present kind of that sense of the person being put together or being organized. And so really all of the things that you bring to a presentation, not just the words you're speaking, but all of the things sort of around it are all communicating something about you to your audience. So it's important to kind of think about how you're organizing your materials. Your posture, your movement, how you're oriented to the audience in terms of your positioning of your body. Obviously in an online setting, you're likely going to be standing or sitting in a chair. So you'll be sort of automatically facing your audience, but in a lot of face-to-face settings, it's not uncommon for people to be facing their screen more than they are the people in the room. And so it's just important to make sure that you're really facing your audience and you're engaging with your audience, and you're of course making eye contact with them. Space and distance is important. Movement is important. In terms of space and distance, kind of thinking about where you are in a room relative to where other people are, and not standing in a way that would block people being able to see the presentation. So for example, if there is a PowerPoint projector, for example, or a projector, you want to make sure that you're standing in such a way that you don't have the visual of that PowerPoint blocked. Gesturing, of course, is important. And then there's all of the things related to the vocal aspects of our speech. So our tone of voice, are we engaging? Are we interesting? Are we using our voice and our words in a way that is professional? What is our volume? Are we speaking loudly enough for people to be able to hear us? This is another way that you can use a practice session to your advantage, is to have someone stand at the farthest point in the back of the room to make sure that you're audible to somebody who's maybe sitting way in the back. Your rate of speech, how quickly you speak, and then also inflection. Inflection, of course, has to do with the highs of our voice, the highs and lows of our voice, and trying to avoid speaking in a more monotone manner, which can certainly be difficult for people to hold on to for an entire length of a presentation. And then eye contact and facial expressions are also important. Sometimes, presenting academic research can be a little dry, and a couple people mentioned this. How do we present academic or research data in a way that is engaging? And a lot of this has to do with our own energy around our topic, and the way that we express that energy through the use of our voice, through our mannerisms, and how we engage with the audience around our topic. So, there are certainly people who present sort of standing in one place and maybe reading off their slides in a very monotone way, and others who have a really strong handle on their data and can engage the audience with storytelling and interesting anecdotes related to their data, and using their nonverbal and vocal communication skills to really bring out the most energy possible without going overboard. We don't necessarily need people to be cheerleaders, but you do want to present in a way that is engaging to your audience. I saw a comment come in, so I just want to check real quick and see if there's a question up here that we might need to answer. So we had one question about references. Yes, references should certainly be included in the presentation, and I would absolutely put them as, I would actually say, the second to last slide. And I would have a thank you to your committee and some expression of gratitude to your committee at the very end. And then there's another question here around the rate of speech. So I usually find that we present faster, so it's always wise to speak slower and time yourself in practice and during your presentation. That's absolutely true. Thank you, Dr. Boozer, for that tip. What are some other nonverbal or vocal communication skills that we might want to consider or think about as we're presenting? Are there other things that aren't on this list that you want some tips on or some guidance on that might be helpful for you?
This is Jeff. I could throw in something dealing with a Zoom-like environment has many of these need to be taken into account for sure, but also other items such as what's behind you, or background and what you're wearing, as you said. because it could set up kind of a moire pattern or something shimmering that could be very distracting. Just a quick story. I had worked at Ashford University, and the School of Business had recorded Steve Forbes' daughter. She was making a recording for the business school, and very wealthy, as you can imagine. And they had some Greek or Roman statues behind her, but they didn't realize that the state of, well, it was kind of disrobed, shall we say. And so the very distracting thing was what was standing behind her. And, you know, everyone commented later about that and not on her presentation. So backgrounds count. And, and the fact that you can record yourself also can be very helpful on Zooms, because you can practice with yourself without, you know, any social distancing requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know there's been quite a bit in the news about how the backgrounds of our environments communicate a lot about sort of, you know, where we live, you know, the way our houses are set up, right? The environments that we're in, and that can create sort of a less neutral environment for students to engage in and to learn with each other. And so there's been kind of a push to have the virtual backgrounds, as Jeff, as you demonstrated, and Dr. Boozer has behind her, to kind of help neutralize the environment so that we're in a space where there's not some of those maybe inequities or other things that are showing. I just got a new computer, so I was actually looking for a virtual background earlier, and all I had was pictures of my dog, and I didn't think that would be very exciting for anybody to look at for 90 minutes or so. But yeah, these are all definitely good things to think about. Any other considerations related to vocal or nonverbal skills, either from maybe from Dr. Herrera or Dr. Boozer?
I just included a note about also just making sure if any of your audience members might have any disability that might hinder them being able to hear your presentation or see your presentation, to kind of keep that in mind. Just make sure that you kind of scope out the audience for that, so that, for example, if you're using a video and closed captioning is available, to put it on, or if you're using a graph that requires, that has a really small print, like you said, make sure that maybe you blow it up when you pass it out so that they have it in larger print as well.
Yeah, and the other thing related to that, of course, is the colors that we might use, right? So wanting to make sure that we use colors that are accessible to all people. And actually the 7th edition of the APA manual actually has a whole section on the use of color, because it's becoming more and more common to actually use color for tables and figures, especially with the sort of the proliferation of all things electronic, right? So we're seeing more and more students uploading theses and dissertations in an only online format. That would have saved me a lot of money 10 years ago if I didn't have to print all those dissertations. So more and more we're seeing dissertations and theses in electronic formats. Academic articles for publication in journals are in an electronic format. And so because of that, having more and more color presented is becoming more common. And so it's also important in doing that and in choosing color that we're using combinations that are accessible to all audiences. So the same is true for using color in a slide format as well. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Heather, do you have any other thoughts about vocal or nonverbal skills that you would add, or any other tips to share?
The one that comes to mind is the verbal virus. The using too many the fillers, I guess they're called.
Sure.
And I think that practicing can help with eliminating some of that. So that's the only thing that I would add.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been, interestingly, when I first started teaching public speaking and presentation skills a million years ago, there was a really big focus on eliminating those as much as possible. And there's been, in the past 10 years, at least as I've sort of continued to read about these things, of course, anything over the top can be distracting, but it's also focusing too hard on removing them can also make you seem really unnatural. So there's also sort of I think a happy middle where you do want to be conscious of them and try to eliminate them from your speaking. Oftentimes, if we use them a lot in our general day-to-day speaking, it can transfer over when we're speaking in a presentation format. And I think that the trick often is to try to eliminate them when we're speaking just in everyday conversation, which can be really, really challenging to do. So, okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about focusing on self-care. I know this seems like a strange thing to put in a presentation on presentation skills, but especially when you're nervous and you're thinking about, you know, how many people are going to show up in a room for my defense? How many people are going to be at the conference presentation? I have a job talk that I'm presenting, and there's going to be faculty there and students there, and I'm really nervous about that. And so there's a lot of anxiety that can build up in the time before an important presentation, and that's normal. Most people experience that, and I think that a lot of that has to do with how much you care about what you're delivering. I think to have a big important presentation and to not be nervous, it would be concerning. I think most people get nervous before a big presentation. I know I have a number of colleagues who are faculty members who have been teaching for years, and they still say that they get nervous before the first day of class. And they've been doing it over and over again, and sometimes with the same topic. So I think it's very, very common to feel some nerves and some anxiety before a presentation. I think this really demonstrates, you know, care about your own performance and how well you do, and of course care about the audience. But I think there's some things that we can do to help. One, of course, is around the food we eat, making sure that we're eating foods that we would normally eat. I would not recommend trying a new cuisine the night before a dissertation defense or a conference presentation. You know, sometimes when you're at a conference, you might think like, oh, I've got all these colleagues that are going out to dinner and they're going to try this new restaurant over on such and such a street. And so you go out with everyone and you kind of want to be part of the festivities. And if you eat something that's not normal for you, that can have dire consequences. So definitely important to kind of think about keeping things as normal as possible. The other thing that people often do, and I experience this as well, is that sometimes when I'm nervous, I just don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. And that can also have negative consequences, because as you deprive yourself of food, you're then depriving yourself of energy that you need and focus. And I know for me, it can have an emotional effect on me when my blood sugar is low. I even tell my partner, Dennis, I'll look at him when I start to get kind of fussy, and I'll say, I think I need to eat something. My blood sugar is low. And it's usually because I haven't had enough to eat. So this can definitely play into the anxiety that you feel and just not feeling at your best before you're ready to present. I would also really think about your sleep and your, as they say, your sleep hygiene. Because sleep is really, really important. So in the week leading up to a big presentation, really thinking about getting on a good sleeping schedule. Not everybody claims to need 8 hours. I know I joke that if I'm not good for the world unless I get 8 hours of sleep, and that can be true for a lot of people. So especially before a big presentation, before a really important presentation, you know, thinking about what is the number of hours of sleep that you need to really be at your best for that presentation, and making sure to schedule your day accordingly. I would also recommend avoiding alcohol the day or the night before a big presentation, because when we are nervous, sometimes we want more than one glass of wine or one cocktail. Sometimes we want two because we're nervous. And so that makes us feel a little bit better, and it may make it feel like the anxiety is starting to dissipate a little bit. But that, of course, can have negative consequences on how you feel the next morning. And really in terms of your clarity and kind of your focus. And then your caffeine intake the morning of a big presentation can also be really negatively impactful to your own sense of your jitters and kind of where those jitters are coming from, right? Because when we have a lot of caffeine, we might feel kind of antsy. And it can be hard to tell, am I antsy because of the presentation, or am I antsy because I've had 3 cups of coffee, right? And so making sure that we sort of limit that intake on the day of, and really focus on drinking water is really important to just keep a clear mind and clear focus on a presentation. I would also recommend carving out time to take a walk or practice yoga or mindfulness or meditation. My partner and I just started a morning meditation practice using the app called Calm, which we both love, and it's like 10 minutes in the morning, and it's just such a nice way to kind of start the day. So anything like that that can help you to channel your anxious energy in a productive way, I would certainly recommend. Of course, the trap is when you have a presentation and a lot to do to get ready, we tend to think that, oh, well, we don't have time for these things. And so you just sort of skip over all of them and keep going. But all of these things are actually really, really important to making sure that you're as present as possible for a presentation. I would also recommend kind of thinking about boundaries and how you might need to set some healthy boundaries in place so that you can stay present to your presentation. And this is easier for some people more so than others. Of course, if you have a couple children at home, it might be a little bit harder to set boundaries with them. But I know for my partner and me, I will generally tell him in advance, hey, I have a presentation on this day. I'm going to need this time to prepare for this. We communicate about that up front, so he knows when I'm going to kick him out of the house so that I can focus. And so we have those conversations so that I can be sure that I'm putting my best self forward when I present. So even sometimes with friends, if you know you have something coming up and you have friends requesting time together, maybe just saying, hey, this week isn't a great week, but I'd love to get together after my presentation and celebrate or whatever. So that can be hard to do, but I also think it's important so that you can stay focused. There's often a lot of celebratory activities around defenses, especially I know that I had a number of people who defended before I did, and so they all wanted to go out and celebrate. And I thought, gosh, I can't go out to a restaurant or a bar where I might not get home until 9:30 or 10 o'clock or later when I'm 2 days ahead of my dissertation defense. So I needed to set some boundaries, and as hard as it was to not be there for some of those celebrations, I also was trying my very best to take care of myself so that I could be at my best at the time that it was my time to defend my dissertation. Are there other things that you can kind of think of that help you to be at your best before you present something like a capstone project or a class presentation? Any other ideas? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to some thoughts about conference presentations. So when you're presenting at a conference, there are, all of the things that we talked about are certainly relevant. There are a number of things, though, that I think are important to consider. I've been to more academic conferences that I can count, and one of the things that I've always noticed is that, especially if you're presenting in a format where you have multiple people presenting within a certain block of time, it's almost inevitable for the person who speaks first to go over. I don't know that I've ever actually seen someone finish their presentation on time. I see Dr. Boozer nodding, so I think that might be a common occurrence. So when I talk about presenting at conferences, one of the things that I always advise is that you develop 2 presentations. You develop a presentation for your full 20 minutes, which is usually about how much time you would have it if you were presenting in a block of, let's say, 3 people. And then also also create a presentation that could fit into like a time block that's maybe 5 minutes shorter, because if you're in the middle or at the end, it's very likely that you won't actually have the full block of time available to you. And that can create a lot of anxiety if you're in the room recognizing that your time is sort of getting shaved off minute by minute. And instead of having to face that anxiety, sometimes it's easier to just say, hey, that's okay, I've got this. I actually know how to present this information in 15 or 16 minutes as opposed to 20 or 25. So that's just something that I've kind of thought over time is a helpful way to prepare in advance. Again, you want to use your visuals to highlight your main ideas and of course not replace you as the presenter, and really focusing on simplicity. A lot of conferences have rooms that can be anywhere from 50 people to 200 to 300 people or more. It really just depends on the size of the presentation. So knowing that in advance is really helpful. What is the room that you've been assigned? What might be the expected attendance? Thinking about the time of day. I presented a conference session once at 8 a.m. on the last day of the conference. So I was pretty confident that it was going to be a light attendance at my session, as opposed to being in the first slot at the beginning of the conference where generally more people still had the energy to be attending sessions. And I was right. It was about half the room full, and that was the same for other people who were presenting in that same block of time at whatever it was, 8 o'clock in the morning. You want to, when you're thinking about a conference presentation, you really want to limit content on the background in the literature, because you really generally have a pretty limited amount of time. Now, all conferences are different. I'm a regular attendee at NASPA and ACPA, which are two conferences that are mostly focused on individuals who work in higher education and in student affairs. And usually those sessions, while there might be co-presenters or individual presenters, they're not the same as you would usually find at an academic conference where you have multiple people presenting in one block of time. So at those conferences, you usually see someone taking up the full amount of time on their presentation. But if you are limited to only 15 or 20 minutes, you really want to focus on your data and any sort of meaningful implications from your data, as that's really why people are there, to really learn about the new and exciting research that you've found. Of course, practicing ahead of time, again, planning ahead for the unexpected, and spending time in the space where you will present if possible. Anytime I presented at a conference, the day before, I always look at the conference schedule. I try to see where there might be a space in the day in that particular room where I could pop in, even for 10 or 15 minutes, just to spend some time in the space. For me, I get anxious when I don't know what the environment's going to be like. So it helps me quite a bit to sort of reduce my anxiety when I can actually go into the space and walk around for a while. And I would also recommend engaging with your participants, demonstrating your confidence and professionalism really at every point in the presentation. I always love attending a conference presentation when someone shakes my hand or at least smiles and acknowledges that I've walked into the room. Of course, this is different if you have a room full of 200 or 300 people, but if you have a room of maybe 30, 25 to 30, trying to make some personal connections at the very beginning can really help to help you to come across as more engaging and accessible to your audience, and I think can really help you to deliver a more powerful and impactful presentation. Okay, so a couple, actually, let's stop there for just a second. Any questions for those of you on the call around conference presentations? Have any of you delivered a conference presentation, or maybe thinking about submitting a presentation at a conference that you'd like to kind of talk through? Any challenges that you foresee or any questions you might have? Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some tips for job talks. Again, this may not be relevant to everyone on the call, but definitely some things to keep in mind for down the road for those of you who are thinking about going into academic positions at some point. I think I've seen a lot of students present job talks. I think it's one of the things that I think is the biggest miss is a presentation where it's very clear that the applicant has not researched the faculty, the department, or the institution well enough to really weave some thoughtful comments and perspectives and insights into their presentation relative to who the faculty are, what's important in the department in terms of values, what are some trends or strategic priorities at the institution. These are all things to think about and know ahead of time. Similar to what we've shared before, you of course want to know your audience, and oftentimes the content for a job talk is either going to be a research or a teaching presentation. It really just depends on the institution. So what is expected of you? Are you expected to present on maybe your dissertation research or your research agenda in general, or are you going to be delivering a teaching presentation to students? How much time do you have, and how much time is there for content versus questions? And then again, the setup of the space and the technology, and as much of that as you can know and practice with ahead of time, the better. You always, with a job talk, you always want to demonstrate your research agenda and its importance, and not just to academic audiences, but in general. And I think this is always a challenge, is how do you take all of the data and all the information that you've been working on and make it accessible to a wider audience. So how do you make your work engaging and accessible to everyone is really a key priority. You may or may not have people in the room who understand your methodology, for example. They may not understand the reasons for choosing to do the study that you did. So it's important to make sure that they understand that and that they understand your methodology and can connect to your work in a way that is meaningful for them. I have been in several job talks where I've seen applicants get really defensive in response to questions or have a hard time responding to them. And probably the worst is seeing people make up answers or sort of try to come up with an answer that maybe isn't accurate because they don't know. So when I talk about job talks, I always try to give some helpful information on this, which is just really to think about questions during a job talk, or really any presentation. If it's a defense, if it's a conference presentation, I think it's really important to think about questions as part of a larger conversation and to treat those questions with both respect and gratitude. Some of the most polished presenters I've seen really, they thank people for their questions. They respect the person who delivered the question. And when they don't know the answer, they simply say, that's a really great question, and I'm not sure of the exact answer to that, but they might hypothesize a response, and which can show, of course, that they're thinking critically about the question instead of just shrugging their shoulders and saying that I don't know. And then, of course, you want to discuss the implications of your work and future research. So these are, again, important things to consider in presenting a job talk. And this is really just on top of all of the other things that we've talked about in terms of preparation, vocal and nonverbal skills, et cetera, et cetera. Has anybody on the call delivered a job talk? Dr. Boozer, did you deliver a job talk for your position?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that you could share with us about your experience?
I think for me, it was also helpful to think of, to also kind of work the room. I did a teaching presentation, and I think sometimes people will go and they'll just stand very fixated at the top of the room. And it's important for you to really engage with your audience and move around, especially if you're doing a teaching talk. I think that helped. It made a big difference where I felt more connected with those that were participating in the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in a teaching presentation especially, right, you want to demonstrate that you're engaging and that you can engage with students and faculty around your content. And so standing in one place, right, we can all imagine being in a room with a faculty member who never moves, right, and that's not going to necessarily communicate someone's capacity to deliver an engaging session.
Frozen, definitely.
Right, exactly. Well, we have plenty of time for questions, so I wanted to kind of give time. I know that there were some specific things. Let me close out of this real quick so I can see all of you. I know that there were a number of things that you all raised kind of as either things you wanted to learn or questions, so I thought we could just spend some time, and if folks have any questions that you want to ask about relative to a presentation you have coming up, or things that you might be anxious about or nervous about related to presenting, I'm happy to chat with you a little bit and answer some questions.
Well, thank you. This is Jeff again. You mentioned Fred, and Fred happens to be my chair. And and you mentioned he may have some final questions. Maybe later we can talk about what he popped on you. So I would now, assuming he was your chair too. So anyway, now
Jeffrey, I would suggest that you go to some defenses with him as a committee member, because he definitely has some specific. I graduated in 2010, so I just remember everyone sort of talking about his final question, but I don't actually remember exactly what it is. So you'll have to report back and let me know if you can discover what it is.
Fair enough. And unfortunately, I went back and looked at proposal defenses, and they were in February and March. And so right now but I have the dissertation defenses, a few coming up. So I'll go ahead and and see if I can't find a Fred defense. Thank you.
A Fred defense, yeah.
Defense against
yeah, and we're also in, while defenses obviously at different campuses are different, you know, it might be worthwhile to kind of look online at UCSD and see, you know, what's posted there, and are there defenses that are open to the public? Because if there are, then it's certainly, you know, certainly acceptable for you to pop in and to listen. So that might be an option as well. SDSU, of course, and there's some similar, you know, similar disciplines and majors at those campuses, so that may be a good way to go as well.
By the way, I did see an interesting email in my search for defenses that was circulated by Souls in regards to the upcoming defenses and their structure using Zoom sessions. And one of them was you're limited to 5 guests, and the guests have to be vetted or at least pass through the assistant, whatnot. So anyway, there does seem to be some new structure that's been laid out.
Yeah, well, and it's really, I think, really good to know that, right? You would certainly not want to invite a whole bunch of people and then show up and have them not permitted into the space. I had a lot of people at my defense, and I think that was partially because I had, you know, worked at UC San Diego for a really long time. I did my master's work at San Diego State, so I just knew a lot of people locally. So I think I had a whole, I worked very closely with college students, and so all of my students at UCSD wanted to drive down for my defense. So I forgot to tell them ahead of time not to bring anything, but they created a sign that said, "Congratulations, Dr. Henry," and they were sitting at the back of the room, and I'm like, it's not a concert. But I certainly did not think that they were going to actually like create a poster board sign for after my defense. But
I had one other question, and just open it up to yourself and others, and that would be of the different elements you would show at a defense. Are they equally weighted? Do you think does it depend on committee members what they want to hear more of and less of? Does the literature review matter as much as other aspects of it? Any opinions on that?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Dr. Herrera and Dr. Boozer simply because they're probably more connected to the faculty and what some of the trends might be at USD.
I had the same question. So it's funny because I had a student ask me, because the learning and teaching folks are going to present to faculty, and they asked me for the slides, like they know the outline of what has to be included in the presentation, but they said, how much time do we spend on each slide? And I didn't know, Sarah, if you had a rule of thumb, but exactly your point, like how much time do we spend explaining the research question? How much time do we spend on the literature review? Should we really just save all our energy and focus for findings and discussion? Or so I don't know. I don't have an answer.
I mean, I would generally, you know, take the total number of minutes and sort of divide it by the number of content pieces, and then kind of think about if you need to sort of, you know, shift the slicing of the pie a little bit differently depending on, and to your point, like what is the weight, right, of these different areas. I would generally say that the data and the implications are probably the more important part, because you do of course want to provide enough context for your committee and for the folks in the room to sort of understand the background. So similar to a conference presentation, a lot of people in the room who are coming to the session are probably going to know something about the literature and something about the sort of the background of your study and why it's important. So you don't want to spend the whole time talking about that and then not have the opportunity to talk about the exciting results that you've found in your study. So I would probably weight it more toward the data. I would be surprised if a committee said, no, we really want to have you talk about the literature review for 10 minutes. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think when I did my defense, I mean, I think I had one slide that kind of talked about in general what was my theoretical framework, like what were the general theories that I kind of used as a framework for my study, and then probably a couple bullets related to the literature, like what were some of the key and most salient findings related to the literature, but not more than maybe a slide.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Question from Moshe. She wants to know about poster presentations. Do you have advice on the difference between a presentation and a poster presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hadn't planned anything specifically on that, but I've certainly seen, a lot of them at conferences. It's very common for academic conferences to host poster sessions. So I think some of the things that I would say are really, because people are often coming by a poster and visiting with you, the interesting thing is that sometimes people look very aloof or not very open to conversation. And I think that the poster presentation is different in the sense that you really can engage with people about your research in a very meaningful way. And if you're standing there and you're looking at your phone or playing Words with Friends, it's not going to be as inviting to somebody who may actually be interested in your topic. So I think for a poster presentation, I would think about what is a title that people could see far enough away that they might sort of glom onto the title and want to come talk to you. But how do you sort of show up and present yourself in a way that's really engaging? I will remember to turn off my email tomorrow because it was so funny. I went into my email to open the Zoom session and then I forgot to close out my email so it wasn't dinging during the presentation. But yeah, I think making sure that you're standing in such a way that you're inviting people to come speak to you as opposed to being distracted with other things. Really, that's the goal of the poster presentation, is to communicate your results, but also to provide an opportunity for you to connect and communicate with people who might be attending the poster session. And to be honest, if I walk through a poster session and I see someone not looking up and kind of connecting with people who might be passing by and they're focused on their phone or just not looking up, I'm sort of less intrigued to go talk to them. And I think that's a missed opportunity, of course. You still want to think about your dress and dressing professionally. It's no different than if you were presenting a more formal presentation. And then I think the other thing to think about is your visual, and making sure that, all of the things that we talked about with simplicity, consistency, and formatting, all of those things are really important. There can be a tendency to try to put as much as possible on a poster. And I think that's similar to any other presentation. You kind of want to think about what are your key points, what are your salient points, and then try to limit what's on there to be easy enough for people to engage with at maybe a 2 to 3 foot or 4 foot distance, right? Because you're not really trying to get people to stand three inches away and read everything. You're really trying to get them to stand at a little bit of a distance, be able to get enough information about your topic overall and engage with you. I love when people for poster sessions, I love when they pass out like even a little half sheet of some takeaways. It doesn't need to be a full paper, but even something that might have your kind of key takeaways, contact information for them. I think it's really very slick, even though you may not be in a professional position yet, to have a business card made that indicates that you're a graduate student at a certain institution. It can honestly be as easy as black text on a white card that's just really professionally done. And that way, if you're engaging with people who maybe they have a similar area of interest in terms of their research, it could be an opportunity for a shared proposal for a conference session at some point, or even a journal publication. So I think if you're there and you're talking to somebody and you don't have something to hand out, it can be challenging to forge those connections after a conference. So just a couple things to kind of think about related to poster presentations.
Great, really good advice. I hadn't thought about those things. Any advice or any wisdom you can pass on, as now you are a veteran presenter, having done 5 today alone. What would you say is something we have to stay mindful of that we're presenting to people through Zoom or whatever, whatever technology we're using? We're not in the same room anymore.
Yeah.
And so, like Leslie, you were talking about working the room. How do we work the room when we're doing it remote?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will, I'll admit that it was really nice to see faces when I first got on, and there's a number, of course, videos that are not on, which is fine, and that's totally people's choice to not have their video on. But I think that does make it a little bit less less engaging for me as a presenter, because I want to be able to see people's faces and kind of see their reactions to things and connect with them in a more intimate way. So even having a picture on, like Melissa has her picture, and so I can see Melissa's face that way, I can see Jeffrey's face that way. But I think, you know, coming on a little bit early and being able to engage with folks prior to the start of a session is really good. I think also thinking about if there are questions that you want to ask to get to know people, instead of just saying like, how are things going? Right, which is kind of a general question, is really trying to come up with things that are specific for people to answer, so that you're not just kind of throwing an open-ended question into the wind without a more specific response. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of other tools outside of Zoom that can be used for group meetings with even breakout capabilities. I know, you know, if you're thinking about things like that where you want people to engage, but I think I don't know that I've done a lot of webinars, and I haven't done as many presentations like this where there's sort of faces on the screen. So I don't know if Leslie or Heather, if you have any other ideas for kind of keeping people engaged in an online space.
My only other tip would be just make it not super long, or not as long as I would give them in person, just because people, I think, sometimes want to stretch their legs. Like I try to build in breaks and keep them as active as they can. Like I'll use breakout rooms. We have Zoom Pro provided to us by the university, so that's really helpful. So you can use some of those other tools, and I think incorporating those in help a lot. Even sometimes break it up with a video that I'll play that's a couple of minutes, you know, just so it's not just them looking at me the entire time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I will admittedly say that I probably have room to grow in that area as a presenter, because I've done so much of my presenting, even at USD. I've been on campus, I don't know how many times, you know, presenting face to face. And so there's time for groups to break out, or for individual reflection time, or for reporting out in different ways than you would do in an online space. And it is different. It's, you know, and webinars are also very one-directional, right? Especially if you have attendees that are not interacting outside of typing in questions, you're really delivering the whole time without a lot of engagement. So I think that this is, in our new COVID world, I think this will be a space for me to kind of think about more too, in terms of how I can improve my own approach to presentations like this. Jeffrey, did you have something you wanted to ask or add?
I was dovetailing with what Dr. B mentioned, and that is during the day, I'm an instructional designer here at USD, and I've been noticing that a lot of the materials for Zoom have been building for faculty use and others that go into breakout rooms, how to set that up, and different tips and tricks. And of course, Zoom itself has a lot of how-to videos. So I definitely want to spend more time there myself to learn how to best use the tool. It turns out that when you do make recordings using Zoom, you can record your desktop, a presentation that you could share within your presentation. And they have a number of different recording layouts that you can control. You know, one other thought is, and I agree, Sarah, 100%, that sometimes when you have the video of everyone else and things, it really helps engage. Potentially, one interesting thing was Clayton Christensen said that anything past, I think he said the 7th row was distance education. And at conferences and at even my dissertations, you usually see the back of people's heads depending on where you're situated. What's really cool about this is that there may be a way to configure it so whoever's speaking comes up front and center, right? I've seen that, and that might be something that if I can configure that helps everyone see and actually understand what a person's speaking. So I think it can actually be a more personalized experience, potentially, if you can have some more control over things than you might otherwise.
The time that I've spent, I mean, even just with Zoom meetings, I feel, you know, I spent 15 years in university administration and spent so much time in meetings in rooms. And so the person at the end of the table, you might not ever actually really engage with. And in this space, you actually see everybody right in front of you. And so in the meetings that I have that can be anywhere from, 3 people on my leadership team to 40 people on the team as a whole for our company, I get to see everybody's faces, not just everybody in this big, huge room around a round table. So I've actually felt more connected to my team using virtual technology than I did at UC San Diego for 11 years, being in a room full of 40 people that I may or may not actually get to see face to face. So, so that's actually been really fun. And even though people may not speak as much or may not participate as much, I can still generally see them and engage with them that way, which is really, really nice.
And when they speak, you can actually hear them.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting, though, just to bring it up, is I found that when I'm interfacing with faculty, I have to be really careful about the background I have. Like the last background I had used with a friend where I was on the moon or in the Simpsons house, right? May not be the best setting for someone to take you seriously in an academic setting. So I found I have to be really careful about the background that's going to be shown before I get out there and people think I'm Looney Tunes or something.
I love that you tried to use a Simpsons background though.
Yeah, I did actually, and here it is.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just gonna leave it on because I figured by now.
It's okay. You know me. Any other questions for those of you that are on the call still? Most of them have their speakers off, so. I hear from Jennifer, this was great. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. It's so fun to see some familiar names here from the work that we do with the Souls Graduate Student Writing Center. So Melissa, it's so nice to see you on here, and Mojde, so nice to see you on here. And feel free anytime. I'm gonna send these slides over to Dr. Herrera, and she can send them out to all of you so you have them as a resource. But if you ever have any questions, I do have a USD email address, so you're always welcome to contact me there. And I'm happy to serve as a resource for you. So thanks so much for the time. We did have a couple of hours reserved, but I know that being on Zoom for longer than about 90 minutes can be tough. So, so hopefully these were some helpful tips that you can take away as you think about the next presentation you have.
Thank you so much, everybody.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Good to see you, Leslie.
See you guys. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Bye, Leslie.